All right, me next. My name's Ciara. I am also the class of 2013. Um, I was a sociology major. I truthfully picked the sociology major at first because they were just the most interesting classes that I was in. There were a variety of other classes that I took that really didn't spark my interest. I never thought of myself as a math science person, so I really just enjoyed the classes, and that's kind of how I how I got hooked. Um, I studied abroad in Thailand my junior year. I loved that. It was a really important experience for me in my college career. I think it shaped a lot of independence and also allowed me to kind of think a little bit more critically about what I wanted to do with kind of the rest of my life, living across the world for 6 months. Um, then I think another big piece that influenced my career path was the social work practicum my senior year at Loyola, where I um, learned a bit more about what a social work job would be. It was something that I'd heard about, but I never really had that much direct experience with. I did my internship with, I truthfully don't remember the name of it right now, but it was part of the AmeriCorps program, and it was working with youth who were aging out of foster care and helping them get work experience. I worked in a smoothie shop down at the Inner Harbor, and then did some case management, helping people build resumes and things like that. Um, After school, I worked for a few years at the district attorney's office right outside of Boston. My first year out of school, I worked at one of the highest trafficked courts in Massachusetts, and I did restraining orders and harassment prevention orders all day, every day for a year. And while it was really quite interesting work, I felt burnt out pretty quickly, and I noticed quite a few holes in the criminal justice system that I wasn't comfortable kind of sitting on the side where I was at. Um, so I ended up, kind of taking a shift of I wanted to help people, wanted to kind of be in a role where I was working directly with people, and thought I'd try on healthcare for size a little bit. So I got a job um, at Beth Israel, which is one of the hospitals in Boston. I was working as a community resource specialist in a cognitive neurology unit. As kind of, I joke that I was sort of like the social worker's sidekick, that like sort of the like paperwork stuff, referring people to community resources that fell on me, and some of more like therapeutic work was the social worker's job. So that was kind of my glaring glaring at me that maybe it was time, even though I wasn't, I didn't love school, admittedly, but it was time that I needed to go back to school to kind of get more knowledge and kind of have a little bit more clarity and direction in terms of what I wanted to do. So I utilized some support from colleagues where I worked, and I ended up going back to school for my master's in social work at Simmons University in Boston. That was a great program. It was something that, I did a lot of research around the area of what was going to be a good program for me. Social work school is not inexpensive, so it was quite a choice that I needed to feel pretty confident in. So I did follow through with that. During my time there, to kind of help pay for things, I worked in a domestic violence shelter. I'd work overnight shifts, nighttime shifts, morning shifts, kind of at any of my free time, which is a really a different lens and perspective, but was helpful for shaping some of my work moving forward. My internships in social work school, one was in early interventions. That was working kind of kids who were newborn through 3 years old, supporting kind of families through those developmental milestones. And then my second year, I worked in a domestic violence and sexual assault unit at a local hospital. Kind of as you can tell, I was a little all over the place with what I was doing, but it all comes it all comes together to where I am now. Um, my first job out of social work school, I worked as a clinician at an eating disorder outpatient clinic. I ran group therapy, I did individual therapy, and I really enjoyed that work. Again, it was a pretty taxing environment to work in, and I after about a year and a half, I made a shift to where I am now and where I plan to stay for the foreseeable future. I'm a clinical social worker at McLean Hospital, right outside of Boston. I worked for 2 years. In the inpatient units. So inpatient psych, I was kind of working with adults in all sorts of kind of presentations, age ranges, 18 plus. I was working on inpatient units for anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, trauma dissociative disorders, and then also a geriatric unit. So I kind of ran the gamut of people who I'd come across. Right now, since the pandemic started, I have shifted to an outpatient role, which I'll get to that a little bit more so too. I work now in the McLean's partial hospitalization program. So it's folks who are either stepping down from an inpatient stay or trying to avoid an inpatient stay and need a little bit more support. I think sociology is something that influences my day to day all of the time. I'm helping folks navigate some really complicated systems, and I am also a part of a pretty complicated and at times oppressive system. So it's I think I did go to school with a lot of folks who went from a bachelor's in social work to a master's in social work. And I've always really appreciated my background in sociology to kind of have a bit of a wider lens of systems and how they influence other systems and how they impact people. I think it was a really important piece to my work and something that I certainly appreciate day in and day out. The program that I work in actually has a very big research component in itself, where we track a lot of the outcomes of our treatment. Social work is oftentimes considered like the applied science of sociology. So I think it's important that we track sort of kind of where folks come in and where folks go to. The pandemic has certainly impacted my work. I was working inpatient for about the first, I think, year of the pandemic, providing psychiatric care to folks with masks on, really being on the front lines of things. We were having people who were testing positive on our units. I was exposed to COVID quite a few times, getting weekly testing. Working with folks who have lost a lot of their social support and connection, and how much of an impact that has on their mental health. We are in the midst of a serious mental health crisis with a lack of providers. People who, the amount of people who I saw over the past few years who had never really touched the system before was pretty significant. So I think that certainly, right now I work from home, which is something I never ever pictured I'd be able to do, working in a hospital for so many years. For so long, my mom on snow days has always been like, are you sure you're going to work? And working in a hospital, you're always going to work no matter what. So this has been different to be able to kind of be at home. I think from a systems perspective, it's been great. I'm able to provide care to people who live all around Massachusetts, rather than just people who have access to, transportation and things like that. But kind of on the flip side of things, there's certainly a benefit for people to be able to connect and meet in person that has been taken away by the pandemic. So kind of all things that we're thinking critically about all the time in our work. So that's kind of the long-winded way of where I am today.
Ciara, Lily writes, my aspirations include mental health counseling too. I plan on going to graduate school in a year or two. Before then, I'd like to gain field experience. What do you suggest, since I will be competing with others who have higher degrees? How do I tap into the counseling aspect rather than the research or casework?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there's a lot of moving parts to that question too. It'll A lot of that will be influenced by where you live. I've done all of my work in Massachusetts, and there really aren't counseling opportunities in from a bachelor's level. So that's a lot of my work experience. I was observing people who were in counseling roles and being able to talk to people who are in those counseling roles. And I think, from a mental health counseling standpoint, we hear a lot. There's a variety of different degrees that you can also get to do that. Like I have a sister who's a psychologist, and we have a very different we had a very different school trajectory. We do very different work. Then I also have friends who are licensed mental health counselors who have also a very different kind of career path, and they do like primarily counseling and individual therapy. So I think my advice would be to talk to different people who have different types of degrees and to get an idea of places where they've worked. I also think kind of thinking about what type of setting you would want to be in. Are you interested in working with kids or adults, or thinking about those types of things. I think with mental health counseling, I right now on the side of my job, I have a private practice where I do individual therapy. So, I was drawn to social work because, to what Ashley was saying, is you can really do so many things with it. So I think talking with other people who have worked in different settings, different licenses, to get an idea of sort of what are the options out there for you, where you want to be. I think even in individual counseling, the casework doesn't really end. So it's a good skill to have either way.
Right. So Rixie's asking, have you guys ever doubted or regretted majoring in sociology? Do you think there could have been another path or major for you?
I can start. I was actually just having this conversation with my husband yesterday. We were like, if you could go back in time and have any major, what would it be? I think personally, when I was at Loyola, it was most of the people that I was spending time with were business majors. My brother is also a Loyola graduate who was a business major. We have we have very different lives, and I think that at times that clouded my thoughts about things. And sometimes looking back, I'm like, oh, wow, that would have been so. Maybe my life would be so different. I really love the work that I do. I think I've had quite a few opportunities to like pivot off into different directions, and I haven't. I've kind of just gotten deeper into the work. So I wouldn't say I regret it. I do. What I came up with my consensus was that I would have been a biology major if I never had to do math and science. But
I was just going to ask, what would you tell your senior self? So if you could go back in time, think back to when you were seniors and you were getting ready to figure out what was next, what would you tell yourself at that point in time?
I think I would tell myself that kind of, while the decision for your next step is important, there's always room to pivot. Like that your first job out of school isn't necessarily your career, and that you can change your mind. Like I still, at this point, feel like I could change my mind. And I actually think one of the perks of a sociology degree and also some of the work experience is that I actually do think that a lot of the skills and knowledge shift into a lot of different places. So I think just kind of, while I can feel like, I have to make all these big decisions right away, that there's actually a lot of room for flexibility. I have something else to add of what I would tell a senior year self. Now that I'm thinking about it, is I think one of the things that I wish I did more of was talk to people who were working. because I don't think even now, like I talk to people in different careers. I'm like, oh, I didn't even know that type of job existed, or like that field existed. There's people that even I work alongside now who have like really specific interests in training. And I think the more that you can network and talk to people who are kind of already in the working field, and I don't think that, personally, when I got asked to come talk to you folks, like I was excited about that because I was like, oh, this is like, I'd love to share what I'm doing with people. So I think that when I was a senior, I was like, oh, people don't have the time to talk or don't want to talk about what they're doing. But kind of sitting from the working person standpoint, I would talk to people all day long about what I do. So I think reach out to people if you're curious about their job and how they got there, even if it's something that you want to understand more. Don't hesitate to do that, because I think you'd actually learn a lot and build some really great connections.